twisting that because that's jury rigged on there.
Oh, okay. I'll just turn.
You have to get louder than that.
Yeah, I will. Years old, 24, 23. We are a nonprofit that serves the city charter neighborhood associations in Eugene. And we provide the vehicle for charitable donation, which is about everything that a neighborhood association does. So if you've got an event that's a one-time or a shorter series of events, then we'll help you. And you need to be able to come in. And every year, we also hold an event with what we hope is an interesting discussion, and I think we'll have that tonight. We were here last year with a discussion on sidewalks, year before about public participation, getting a lawyer when you need it, and a variety of topics. But tonight we want to talk about the basic thing of neighborhoods, community, because that's basically what a neighborhood association is supposed to foster and sustain, is neighbors knowing each other, doing things together, and having a voice in the city. It's part of that function. I think we have about active neighborhood associations have joined with us at E&I. There are 18 that are active. For level, we meet for picnics at the larger meetings, and for other neighborhoods, there may be quite a bit more, and hundreds of people coming out. I'm going to introduce our board members. I'm going to then introduce our speakers and the topic. We're going to hear from Lynn Ash, an author, and what is the community that comes about, how do we sustain that, and what should we be supporting. We will have our brief business meeting. This is essential for a nonprofit to have a formal meeting. Those of you that have the packets, and we're going to go through that in about 10 minutes, but I'll warn you in advance. It will be interesting, but we'll also try to twist your arm to join our board, which meets once a month for about an hour, and make sure that we keep everything on even keel. And then we're going to have the interactive discussion. Speakers respond to each other, and you get to participate. And that, after that, it's the end. Okay. First of all, E&I has, I think we have 7 positions. We've gone through this year with about 5 board members. I want to introduce number 1 here. He carries the load of most of the administrative work, serving as treasurer and secretary. Prince, I serve as the chair, and wrap the imaginary gavel. I am from the Amazon neighborhood. Over here is Lucy Bambry from Southeast Neighbors, pretty active on a number of things. Relative newcomer to Eugene, but she's fits right in. Noah Burnell from Eugene Downtown Neighbors. Carlos Pereira from the Friendly Neighborhood. And that is, I think, the roster of who's here. I also want to welcome everybody. I wanted to just throw out some of the questions that we'd like to discuss that on this topic of community, that and is especially relevant because we may have a lot of changes in our neighborhoods. New laws have been passed. There's a great need for housing in all across the United States, and no less in Eugene. So rules have been changed about how to build things and how many people. The basic goal is to have more people living in a compact way, in an environmentally friendly way. And so we want to see what's the relationship of that and with how much community is there. That ranges all over the map. Now, one anecdote that impressed this on me was, I said, what changed the South, the southern United States? Air conditioning. Well, turns out that people knew their neighbors by going out and sitting in the screened porch right out by the street, and because they wanted to have cool. And they got to know everybody who passed by. But when air conditioning became affordable, they glassed in the porches. They lived inside. Of course, they went places in air-conditioned cars. and things changed as far as whether you knew your neighbors and the kind of interactions you had with them. So if you think about things like that, when we consider different kinds of buildings going up and also the public infrastructure, will it change how many neighbors and what kind of community feeling you have? And that's all the kind of character, the feeling you get about your neighborhood. This term is used a lot, neighborhood character. And so it could refer to people, it could refer to the landscape, but let's explore the between them. And we want to look at those changes that are in many neighborhoods, changes to how far away the neighbor's house is from your house, how many people are living there, how many trees will be around. That's just the private infrastructure. What will the city have? Streets? It's all happening at once and planned. We're incremental in some of those private infrastructure or the public infrastructure. What does that mean to kind of community events? Native Americans used to get up every morning and go tell Seneca, so according to my anthropology class, they tell their dreams to their neighbors. They were in like long rows. It's a community ritual. There's less community. So how will the new landscape affect the rituals, which includes things like the giant block party that we have in Whitaker every year? And Kaarin Knudson. Lynn Ash has grown up in Eugene, right there in what's now the Jefferson West Side. This memoir left and now coming back has the perspective of seeing it fresh instead of, like the frog in boiling water. You don't even notice what's going on. And she's also a very adventurous person, has traveled around the country as a solo camper in her youth and was one of the pioneers of women's running. Really, before there was such a thing, what the landscape looks like. Now, our other writer is equally qualified. She is an architect and knows a lot about the impact of buildings on our feelings about pro tem.
And yes, I teach
Okay.
the work. I will share.
Okay,
yes.
yeah.
Thank you, Randy.
And she has of the in Eugene and top NCAA competitor with the Oregon Ducks. And as far as being a winner, well, how about 85% in the May primary?
Not that much.
Not that much?
About 75.
You still clobbered everyone else. So, and as far as being a champion, she has championed housing and approach to housing and casting aside some zoning rules that she believes are impeding. And this is kind of a nationwide thing you're hearing a lot about. And I'm going to let Lynn take the stage and tell us what is neighborhood character, what should we value.
No, not really. Okay. Hello, everybody. Okay. Who is this guy? Thank you very much, Randy, for that 17. At the top of Randy's email to me in the subject line was a question. And the question was, does neighborhood character exist in Eugene? And is it worth it to have the opportunity to offer my view of that? There are three themes that I would like to touch on in answering this question. And those are: number one, the physical landscape; number two, history; and number three, nostalgia. But before I begin, I'd like to explain a little about my background and where I am coming from. I was born and raised in Eugene, as Randy said. I went to the University of Oregon and graduated from there. I'm a Duck through and through. And in 19 1937, my family came to Eugene. My mother and father, my grandparents came 1937, and members of my family have lived here continuously to the present day, 87 years. And I am going to live to be 94 so that I can celebrate the centennial of my family's continuous presence in Eugene. So that I won't tell you how many years that'll take. So my story starts at 781 Monroe at the intersection of Blair Boulevard, Monroe Street, and 8th Avenue. I'm sure many of you know this building. It's the old two-story building between Sweet Life Patisserie on the north and Beacock Music on the south. I see a nodding head here, somebody who knows about that. That building is called the Baldwin Market because the original owner was Earl Baldwin, and he opened a meat market on the bottom floor sometime probably around 1917. But we know for sure that it was there in 1920. Now, in 1937, when my family came to Eugene, Earl had vacated the apartment upstairs and he had gone out of business. And my father and grandfather leased the building from Earl and opened a grocery store on the bottom. And you'll see that on the cover of Eugeneana. They're standing at the side of their new store. My father's the taller of the two, and my grandfather. And it says Food Service, Ash and Son. Now, in the early 1940s, it was 1941 to be exact, my grandfather purchased the Baldwin Market. And in 1946, he and my father began construction on a brand new market just to the south of our building on the vacant lot next door. And that market was to be Ash and Son, Lane County's newest and most beautiful food market for about 5 music. So the next time you go by Beacock Music, give a nod. Now, I left Eugene in the early 1970s, and I was gone for 40 years pursuing a career, mostly a year, at least once or twice a year, I would drive up from California to visit my family, never dreaming that the time might come when Eugene was no longer my home. There was no one here to visit, and it was devastating. So my longing, 2010, when I made the decision to come back here, family or not, and so I did. That's how I came back. And there was something that was pulling me back to Eugene, just for my old neighborhood, but for Eugene, the entire city. I'd like to read a few short pieces from Eugeneana that express that. To Eugene to reclaim my home. I turned off the freeway at 30th Avenue, passed by Lane Community College, and eased down the hill, marveling at how the city, buried in green trees and the last curve, finally revealed the houses and businesses that confirmed existence. And the next is an incident that happened when I was very young. Excuse me, something familiar. A mood from the old days. It usually doesn't happen, but then as I pass by my facing from its flanks and summit, exactly as it was those many years ago. As a child on clear sky days, I stood on our porch and looked up at the eternal presence of the butte looming over the south end of town. It was nothing special to me then, just part of the familiar landscape I was accustomed to. Today, 6 years after returning to my hometown, the dark green eminence of Spencer's Butte delivers a decidedly emotional punch, filling me with intense love and gladness. I place my trust in the immutability of this landmark. No matter what transmutations occur below its summit, Spencer's Butte will always be there, will always fill me with gladness. And finally, this is an incident that happened when I was a child living at 781 Monroe. Back down between our place and the two-story building next door, two enormous maple trees stood side by side like a portal at the The leaves of those maples turned brilliant red, fell, and covered the sidewalk, not just because they hold powerful. We find comfort in the lushness around us, especially in our older neighborhoods. We feel embraced by the encircling hills. They are constant, moms and dads and sisters and brothers, family. But now we see a cluster of new buildings rising in the center of our city, stretching ever upward into the sky. When I see buildings reaching higher and higher, 4 stories, 6 stories, 12 stories, I begin to feel uncomfortable. Sometimes I will drive or walk to the top of Skinner Butte and I look out beyond downtown, just a little farther to the east. I find that I'm holding my breath, but I release it when I look out and I see that the trees still prevail. They still bury the city in green. When I see that, I hope that will remain true for hoods. And I'd like to use the Whitaker area as an example and read another passage, just one more. From Young, he shrugged. Whitaker School, named for John Whitaker, the first governor of Oregon. Eugenians trying to be cool, I thought. Their own district, like the big cities, a place with a cool name, like the Pearl or the Castro, a place where hip insiders could hang out. How apt, I thought, that Whitaker had been shortened to the Wit, like the history of the area, truncated and forgotten. Who now, occupying Red Barn Grocery, knows the barn was originally a dairy? Who at Shoes right here at the corner of 6th and Monroe knows that the was once lined with cars waiting for car hops to bring their food trays? Who at Fisherman's Market knows that Linda Copping once pumped gas there at her dad's gas station? Well, the Wit is cool, I suppose. It was cool to the young man I spoke to, and to many of my senior citizen friends, the ones who haven't lived here very long. But when I give them a bit of history about the places they like to frequent in the area, their expressions change to fascination and surprise, an acknowledgement in a way of their limited perspectives. But without its history, the Wit, as a discrete, standalone place in time, is much impoverished. Without its history, so let's now consider the new Riverfront neighborhood, excuse me, in the Riverfront district. Brand new, of course. So it's not probable with 95 market rate units. I see just beyond it the portal on Mill, 130 residential units, market rate, of course. To the west, another enormous residential building is going up. The years from now to visit their old hood. How many children will be born here, given the prohibitive costs to many couples of childbearing age? Are children even allowed here? And finally, my last comment, will someone's heart be left behind in the River District and sought decades later, just as my heart was left behind? I do have 3 copies of Eugeneana for sale.
Thank you, Lynn. Absolutely wonderful. Says, who know? The people who know are the people who've heard the stories and who've been a part of the kinds of relationships that you're describing in community. And I love hearing those stories of your life growing up here. I love thinking about the connections between the experiences that you just described and my own life and the life of my children, who are also Eugenians. And it's a true deep honor to be the future mayor of your daughter's hometown. And it's not something that I could have imagined as a part of our family life and experience together. My name is Kaarin Knudson, and it truly is my distinct honor and privilege to be the future mayor of Eugene. My name will be on your ballot again in just a couple of weeks. You'll receive those in the mail any moment now. November election, but due to some of the unique circumstances of a nonpartisan position like Eugene's mayor, as Randy described, I received about 75% of the vote last May, and so my name will be the only name on the ballot. Again, though we've had some bumps in the last couple of weeks, we make it so easy to vote in comparison to other places. I lived in the Bay Area for the 5 years of this last 30 that I was away from Eugene, and I have very strong memories of sprinting around from my little apartment to find my polling place and be able to get there in time before they close to be able to vote. And it's a wonderful thing that we have opportunity to do here so easily. I do not have nearly as beautiful a narrative to share with you this evening. I will share a little bit about my background and introduce myself more to you, and then a few thoughts about current work that is underway within our community and statewide and across this country. Try to provide some context to that work and the unique circumstances that we are living through live, and how the work that we're doing right now is trying to prepare for the future for those who follow us and for the remainder of this 21st century and beyond. And then hopefully we'll have time for just discussion and Q&A and really just a conversation with each other. I would love that. My background, I am an architect, a licensed architect in the state of Oregon who's trained as a journalist and also in studio art, my undergraduate degrees. So I come to architecture from particular bias and orientation to story and to the narrative of places and understand the character and the nature of community that exists in a place where you are trying to think about what a future iteration of that place might be. And that's something that I've really loved as an influence to my work. There's a lot of parallels poetically between the language of writing, the structure of writing, and the language of architecture, and the way that we shape space and create space and structure the opportunity for people to gather and for community to be connected. For this last 20 years, I came back to Eugene in 2004 from a master's degree, chose to come back to Oregon when I made that decision to leave the Bay Area because I wanted to be a place-based professional. I wanted to be an architect who was investing in the landscape that I was practicing within. I didn't want to stay in the Bay Area that I love so much about the San Francisco Bay and surrounding communities. Did not want to head to the Northeast. Wanted to come back to a place that I connected to deeply when I first came here 30 years ago and first discovered the McKenzie River Trail and felt the love that this community shares so openly with people who come here in pursuit of their dreams. And at that time, I was a very young person who was here to get mixed-use redevelopment, small pocket neighborhoods, senior centers, community centers, inclusive neighborhood design, tricky renovations, a really loving restaurant restoration renovation project in the Holt Center that remains one of my favorite buildings. It's such a diva and such a fascinating place to try to work and to try to improve upon, but also work in 2009 to 2011 and the planning and public involvement process for what was then the eWeb Riverfront property, now the downtown riverfront, which for about 100 years had been essentially unoccupied by anything other than industry at that site. And it's a really different chapter that we are now moving into with the location of City Hall at the eWeb headquarters building, with new development, new residences on that site, new planning for parks and infrastructure, and new investments in what should be public spaces that connect to a cultural landscape. That was the vision that this community articulated for that place, and it's a really tremendous opportunity for us as a community to re-inhabit a space, also bring ecological function and social engagement back to an area that hasn't had that happening in that way for a very long time, back to when the steam plant was first built, about 1910. When I think about this last 10 years, bring the available to community, because the purpose of that book and the reason that I spent 7 years devoting myself to the research and writing and design and completion of that understand is that we translate values related to sustainability into the built environment. And there's a lot of that work. Since urban design as an area of practice is interdisciplinary in nature, it brings in issues of architecture, landscape architecture, transportation planning, engineering, the whole universe of disciplines. But it's really an area of overlap between all of that expertise. And it's fascinating also then to think that it is the space, that overlap is the space that we occupy in community, the public realm that serves our city. And I'm really what opportunities might open to us as a community, being a mayor who cares dearly about the quality of our public realm, about the safety of our streets, and the design of those spaces, because so much of the vision that you were just sharing about the character of this play, individual buildings that we occupy and share as our social space. And there's so much that we can do to improve upon those spaces and make sure that they feel welcoming and safe and like they belong to all of us and like we're proud. And there are some big projects that we'll be working on as a community in the coming years that specifically relate to that. The other piece of work that I wanted to do, and when I decided to hang my own shingle and create my own small firm about 10 years ago, it was because I was very interested in and continue to be very interested in public interest work and the way in which we as a community lead ourselves into the future. Right? And basically thinking that I would then be able to decide that I would invest time and energy, figure out how to balance all of those responsibilities into how here. Experts in the individual points of light, but we weren't seeing the picture that we could create with all of that together. So the organization that I started as a public interest project, or referred to it for a couple of years as a project. It's just a project we were going to work on for a little while. That's grown into the independent nonprofit, independent 501c3, Better Housing Together. We have a partner network of about 50 organizations, businesses with a huge diversity of interests and expertise, from affordable housing developers to land conservation groups to builders to racial justice organizations, real estate professionals, transportation advocates, architects, engineers. I'm leaving out probably some big groups, but many different people are a part of that effort. The reason why is because when we organized that work, it was with a vision and a framework that is often described as a collective impact model. And at the that sounds very fancy. If you're very interested in this model of organizing, the Stanford Social Innovation Review is the place to learn about that background. But the important takeaway is that collective impact observes when we're trying to address a structural systemic challenge, one perspective is never going to be enough, no matter how much energy and resources behind that one perspective. We actually need the here when we are talking about the housing crisis and the high instance of homelessness that is a part of that housing crisis in our community. I want to flag for you all that we are right now working on organizing a community event that will be on November 21st at the University of Oregon. And this event will be a free public lecture. We'll get word out and reservations for RSVPs and tickets. But it will be a housing solutions summit, and we'll be bringing Greg Colburn from the University of Washington to Eugene to talk about his book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, and that research. And the reason I wanted to mention it to you all now is because when we think about the housing crisis that is present in our community, and we think about the ways in which this community has grown over time, and especially the ways that this community has grown since the buildings out a lot as a community development that fundamentally is about a single family detached home on a lot, was the typical further towards the East Coast. That is not the only pattern of residential development. You've probably walked through a lot of really delightful neighborhoods with brownstones and triple deckers and cottage clusters, residential homes, very typical, and exist in an abundance in other places, but they don't exist here because we didn't grow up as a community when that was the predominant type of development, the predominant pattern, and the predominant housing type that was being built. So what that means now, as we're thinking about this work of the 21st century, is that if our concerns have to do with sustainability, or with equity, or with affordability, or even with sociability and just quality of life and the type of connectedness that we want to feel as neighbors in this community, work and change related to how we grow and how we build housing is necessary, because we are very spread out and distant from one another, and we don't have a lot of places now that are like the areas of Jefferson West Side that Lynn was describing, where you can go from a resident unit that's living above the store, so to speak, which is another great kind of fantastic pattern that persists all around the world. Howard Davis at the University of Oregon is the researcher who wrote that book, Living Above the Store. It's how Jane Jacobs became an extraordinary American urbanist. She was living above the store and looking out her window to the street below, observing the life that was present there. That pattern is not the predominant pattern that we have to work with, but it is a pattern that we can stitch back into our communities over time, very incrementally. This process Ted and I were talking about before the meeting takes a long time. The built environment takes a long time to change across the areas that we're occupying within our urban growth boundary. But over time, we can see some of these changes that I think will start to support some more of those opportunities for walkable neighborhoods. The other piece that I want to be sure to mention in this organizing, because infill related to neighborhoods and changes in smaller scale level of detail that people might want to. But when we're thinking about our larger housing needs in this community, we also really need to be thinking about our downtown and focusing energy and attention on the creation of new residential places and units within our downtown center. And that's because we lost several hundred, or the historic records that I have read, units of housing during the urban renewal process in downtown, and we've never recovered those units. And what that means is that we don't have people living in our city center, not nearly enough of them living there in their home. And walking downstairs to a small business, patronizing that, being at that corner cafe, being a regular patron to that restaurant that's just down the block. And that is one of the reasons why our downtown continues to struggle, is that we just don't have, it's also an ideal location, and really downtown and some of our transit corridors are really the only locations where we can think about much higher density housing. That's housing that's going to be much more appropriate for 1 or 2 person household need, for smaller housing units and compact housing options that are more affordable for people who are either much younger in their experience or older in their experience and looking for in the city, but locating that in places where people have walkable access to things that they need, where we can have access to good transport options and safe transportation options. That's though many of the different systems of the city are working together, collaborating together to create a great space. So there's probably a lot more that I could say, but one, and then come back and I think have some Q&A. It's really a delight to be with you all here this evening. It's a delight to think about you, and I'll look forward to talking more.
Check and see if it's bad.